Welcome, dear friends, to a fascinating story of unwavering compassion and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Enjoy the story. The hospital lobby buzzed with activity as Vincent, a young medical student with dreams of becoming a doctor, paced the gleaming floors. His eyes darted between the double doors leading to the emergency room and the nurses' station, where Olivia, the beautiful but notoriously arrogant nurse, stood filing her perfectly manicured nails. "You know, staring at her isn't going to make her notice you," a voice said from behind him. Vincent turned to see Zoe, a senior nurse with a no-nonsense attitude, giving him a knowing look. "I wasn't staring," Vincent mumbled, his cheeks flushing. "I was just observing." Zoe snorted. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Listen, Vincent, you're a bright kid. You've got a future ahead of you. Don't waste your time pining after someone like Olivia. Focus on your studies, on becoming the best doctor you can be." Vincent sighed, knowing she was right. But there was just something about Olivia, something that drew him in like a moth to a flame. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the double doors burst open and a flurry of activity spilled into the lobby. "Incoming!" a paramedic shouted, wheeling a gurney through the chaos. "Elderly female, unconscious, possible head trauma." Vincent sprang into action, his daydreams forgotten as he raced alongside the gurney. As he helped transfer the patient onto a bed in the ICU, he caught a glimpse of her face. She was old, her skin weathered and creased with age, but there was something familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of his memory. "Vincent," Dr. Andrew Anderson, the attending physician, barked. "I want you to take a look at her x-rays. See if you can determine the cause of her injuries. We'll discuss your findings in the morning." Vincent nodded, his heart racing with excitement. This was his chance to prove himself, to show everyone that he had what it took to be a real doctor. As he settled in front of the glowing screens, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to change everything. Vincent's eyes burned with exhaustion as he pored over the x-rays, the images blurring together into a haze of shadows and light. He had been at it for hours, studying every fracture, every contusion, trying to piece together the puzzle of what had happened to the old woman. As his eyelids grew heavy, he felt himself slipping into a restless sleep. Suddenly, he was no longer in the hospital, but back in his childhood home, cowering in the corner as his mother screamed in pain. "You worthless piece of trash!" his biological father roared, his fists slamming into his mother's frail body. "You think you can leave me? You think you can take my son away from me?" Vincent watched in horror as his stepfather burst into the room, his eyes wild with rage. "Get away from her, you monster!" he shouted, throwing himself at the attacker. The two men grappled on the floor, their bodies slamming against the walls as they fought. Vincent's mother crawled towards him, her face streaked with tears and blood. "Run, Vincent!" she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Run and don't look back!" But before he could move, his biological father broke free from his stepfather's grip and lunged towards them, his hands outstretched like claws. Vincent felt a searing pain in his head, and then everything went black. He woke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. It had been years since he had thought about that night, years since he had allowed himself to remember the horror of what he had witnessed. But now, as he stared at the x-rays in front of him, he realized with a sickening clarity that the injuries he saw there were all too familiar. The old woman hadn't just been injured. She had been beaten. "Ah, Vincent, there you are," Dr. Anderson said as he entered the room. "What have you found?" Vincent swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he pointed to the x-rays. "These injuries, they're not from a fall or an accident. They're from an assault. Someone did this to her. Someone strong enough to break bones and cause this kind of damage." Dr. Anderson nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that. But who would do such a thing to a defenseless old woman?" Before Vincent could respond, the door swung open and Olivia sauntered in, her high heels clicking on the tiles. "I heard we have a new patient," she said, her voice dripping with boredom. "Some old lady who got beat up by her drunk husband, probably fighting over the last bottle of booze." Vincent felt his blood boil. How could she be so callous, so uncaring? He opened his mouth to retort, but Dr. Anderson beat him to it. "That's enough, Olivia," he snapped, his eyes flashing with anger. "This is a serious situation, not some gossip fodder for you to spread around. If you can't show some compassion, maybe you should consider working at a private clinic catering to the wealthy instead of a public hospital." Olivia's mouth fell open, her face flushing with embarrassment. I didn't mean—" "Save it," Dr. Anderson said, cutting her off. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Vincent and I have work to do." As Olivia slunk out of the room, Vincent felt a rush of admiration for Dr. Anderson. He had always respected the man, but now he saw him in a new light, not just as a brilliant physician, but as a true leader, someone who stood up for what was right. "So, Vincent," Dr. Anderson said, turning back to the X-rays, "what do you think we should do next?" Vincent took a deep breath, his mind racing. He thought of the old woman lying in the hospital bed, of the pain and fear she must have felt. He thought of his own mother, of the scars she bore from his father's abuse, and he knew, with a sudden clarity, what he had to do. "We find out who did this," he said, his voice steady and determined. "And we make sure they never hurt anyone again." The hospital room was quiet, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor. Vincent stood by the old woman's bedside, a small care package clutched in his hands. His mother had sent it, filled with homemade cookies and a soft knitted blanket, the kind of simple comforts that could mean the world to someone in pain. As he set the package down on the bedside table, the old woman's eyes fluttered open. Who are you?" she croaked, her voice hoarse and weak. "My name is Vincent," he said gently. "I'm one of the medical students here. I brought you some things from my mother to help you feel more comfortable." The woman's eyes widened, and Vincent saw a flicker of fear cross her face. You have to help me," she whispered, her hand reaching out to grab his wrist. "My son, he did this to me. He's a monster, and he'll never stop. Please, you have to tell him I died. I'll live on the streets, I'll do anything. Just don't let him find me." Vincent felt his heart clench. He had suspected as much, but to hear it confirmed, to see the terror in the old woman's eyes, it was almost too much to bear. He gently patted her hand, trying to reassure her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. We won't let anyone hurt you, I promise." Just then, the door swung open and Zoe burst in, her face flushed with anger. "Vincent, we have a problem. That old woman's son is here and he's causing a scene at the nurse's station. He's demanding to see her and he won't take no for an answer." Vincent felt a cold fury wash over him. He squeezed the old woman's hand one last time, then straightened up, his jaw set with determination. "Stay with her," he told Zoe. "Don't let anyone in until I get back." He strode out of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the commotion from down the hall, the sound of raised voices and slamming doors. As he rounded the corner, he saw Grace, the kind-hearted nurse from the small town, standing toe-to-toe with a hulking brute of a man. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't let you see her," Grace said firmly, her voice trembling slightly. "She's in no condition for visitors right now." "Don't give me that crap!" the man roared, his face twisted with rage. "She's my mother, and I have every right to see her. Now give me her damn pension card before I—" He raised his hand as if to strike Grace, but before he could, Vincent was there, slamming him against the wall with a strength he didn't know he possessed. "Listen to me, you piece of garbage," he growled, his face inches from the man's. "If you ever come near your mother again, if you even think about laying a finger on her, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. Now get out of here before I call the cops and have you arrested for assault." The man's eyes widened with fear, and he struggled against Vincent's grip. But Vincent held firm, his gaze unwavering, until finally the man slumped in defeat. "Fine," he muttered, shrugging off Vincent's hands. "But this isn't over. I'll be back, and when I am, you'll be sorry." He slunk away, leaving Vincent and Grace standing alone in the hallway. Vincent turned to her, his heart still racing. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, reaching out to touch her arm. Grace nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm fine, thanks to you. That was really brave, what you did." Vincent felt a flush of warmth spread through him. He had always admired Grace, her kindness and compassion, the way she treated every patient with dignity and respect. And now, seeing the way she looked at him, the gratitude in something else, something deeper in her eyes, it made his heart skip a beat. "I was just doing what needed to be done," he said, trying to sound humble. "But thank you, Grace. That means a lot, coming from you." They stood there for a moment, lost in each other's gaze, until the sound of footsteps broke the spell. Vincent turned to see Dr. Anderson striding towards them, his face grim. "I just heard what happened," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Vincent, Grace, I need you to come with me. We have some paperwork to fill out, and then we need to call the police. This has gone on long enough." Vincent nodded, his hand finding Grace's and giving it a gentle squeeze. Together, they followed Dr. Anderson down the hall, ready to face whatever came next. The sun was shining as Vincent and his mother helped Grandma Ethel out of the car, her frail body supported between them. It had been 2 weeks since she had been discharged from the hospital, and in that time, Vincent and his mother had made all the necessary arrangements to take her in, to give her the love and care she so desperately needed. As they entered the house, Grandma Ethel's eyes widened with wonder. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I never thought I would live in a place like this again." Vincent's mother smiled, patting her hand gently. "This is your home now, Ethel. You'll never have to worry about being alone or afraid again." Just then the doorbell rang, and Vincent's heart leaped in his chest. He knew who it was before he even opened the door, and sure enough, there stood Grace, her arms laden with bags of groceries and a shy smile on her face. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly, her cheeks flushing pink. "I just thought I could help out, maybe make some meals for Grandma Ethel to have throughout the week." Vincent felt a rush of affection wash over him. This was the Grace he had come to know and love, the Grace who always put others first, who had a heart big enough to embrace the whole world. "You could never intrude," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "In fact, I was hoping you might come by more often, even if you don't have a specific reason. I like having you around." Grace's smile widened, and she ducked her head bashfully. "I like being around you too, Vincent. In fact, I think I might be falling for you." Vincent's heart soared, and he reached out to take her hand, pulling her close. "I'm falling for you too, Grace. I have been for a long time." They stood there, lost in each other's eyes, until the sound of laughter from the living room broke the spell. They turned to see Grandma Ethel and Vincent's mother, their heads bent together in conversation, their faces alight with joy. "Look at them," Grace said softly, leaning her head on Vincent's shoulder. "They're so happy. You did that, Vincent. You gave them a second chance at life." Vincent felt a lump form in his throat, and he blinked back tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace. You've been there for me every step of the way, always believing in me, always pushing me to be better." Grace smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. "That's because I know who you are, Vincent. You're a good man, with a kind heart and a strong sense of justice. And I know that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together." Vincent nodded, his heart full to bursting. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be obstacles and setbacks and moments of doubt. But with Grace by his side, with his mother and Grandma Ethel to love and support him, he knew that he could face anything. And as he looked out the window, at the bright blue sky and the birds singing in the trees, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was where he belonged, with the people he loved, fighting for what was right and good in the world. And he knew, with a sudden clarity, that he would never stop fighting, never stop striving to make a difference, as long as he had breath in his body. For he was Vincent, the aspiring doctor with a heart of gold, and this was only the beginning of his story.